Adrian's bio on my app. See how that goes. Because I don't really remember the coolest thing. Have you guys been using this app?
Yeah.
So cool, huh? Yeah, I love that you can like make your own people list. So I made a little list of all the people I had introduced. Isn't that so cool? And then I can just scroll right to Adrian. Where are you? Oh my goodness. That's not going the way I wanted it to. All right, there it is. Now let's see if my contacts work. Yeah.
On the list, is there a way that we can email somebody that we met here? I didn't see it. You sometimes see that.
That's a good question. So sometimes we can't share information just because there's too many people that, not that we can't, like data is not an issue, but we just have to be able to ask permission and that just ends up getting complicated. But if you know what chapter they're in, then we can definitely help you find them. Okay? Yeah. Or on community you can find them.
CCL community.
CCL, community.citizensclimatелobby.org is a great place to find people. You can search them by name. Great point. Great. Yeah.
There's a link at the bottom of the homepage. The homepage goes all the way to the bottom.
At the bottom of the homepage, the citizensclimatелobby.org, you scroll all the way to the bottom and there's a link that says CCL Community. If you don't remember the domain like I didn't, even though I've been working here for a while. Okay, so, are we ready to introduce Adrian? Anything else? I have a couple other announcements later, but don't forget to be scientific about your feelings outside. Looks like there's still some donation gifts. You guys could drink beer before noon. No, not doing that. Okay, so Adrian, we're super happy to have Adrian come join us. I was told to make sure that I mentioned that he is handsome, but then he told me not to say that, so I'm not going to say that. He's a senior at Leland High School, which is in the place I grew up in San Jose, California, but don't tell anybody in Oregon that I'm from California, because I get ousted. He's been involved with CCL since April of this year. He has been a conservative fellow for a few months. Really enjoys getting those who are right of center involved with climate action. Outside of CCL, he spends his time running the organization, the Youth Conservative Forum, and getting involved with the local politics in his area. He also competes on his school's speech and debate team and is the senior class president at his high school. So give it up for Adrian Rafizadeh.
Too short there. All right. Hello, everyone. First and foremost, I want to thank the planning committee for their tireless work, not only in flying me out all the way here from California, but also for putting on just this fantastic conference. So let's give them a round of applause right now. Yeah, so as mentioned earlier, my name is Adrian Rafizadeh, and I am a senior at Leland High School in San Jose, California. I have been a conservative climate outreach fellow for a few months since August, and my job is to talk to Republicans about climate action, which is just as fun as it sounds. So, what I wanted to do today is give you all some insight into the development of the story of a young conservative climate activist like myself. But before I do that, I thought I'd reinforce why it's even worthwhile to listen to me. You know, why am I here, and why are you listening to a 17-year-old who can't do his laundry? So, you know, it's no secret that CCL has a demographic problem. You know, it's not really under wraps that the majority of CCL volunteers are neither young nor conservative, but in case it is still a secret, let's unwrap it for good. So, can I see hands raised for anyone who considers themselves to be left of center, if you're comfortable, liberals, progressive, Democrats, whatever, just raise your hand. Gotcha, okay, cool. Let's try the other side. If you're right of center, Republican, conservative, libertarian, hands raised. Alright, okay. So that's one secret uncovered. Alright, let's try age now. Can we raise our hands if we're under 30? Under 20? Perfect. So So with that top-notch research we just produced, it seems like we need more young people and more conservatives to build a more diverse climate coalition. But apart from just balancing some scales and smoothing out the numbers, why in particular are young conservatives important? Because for now we still don't know why I'm here. But let's cover that now. So young conservatives, in my humble opinion, are the ultimate untapped market. There is so much potential within college Republicans, young Americans for Liberty, young Republican clubs that just goes totally unnoticed. Mainstream environmentalists don't dare venture into these conservative spaces, which is such a shame. Frank Luntz, this famous GOP pollster, and he was this former climate denier, conducted a series of polls recently regarding liberal and conservative attitudes towards carbon fee and dividend. And it was so earth-shattering that basically every member of the CCL Conservative Caucus knows it backwards and forwards. Luntz found that, slideshows up and running, I have it up here. That an astounding 75% of Republicans under 40 support a federal carbon fee and dividend. 75%, that's pretty huge. And the question is, why are these folks being left completely untouched by environmentalists? The foundation for action is there, but no substance is growing off of it. And in fact, the foundation is really only enlarging. Right? Clicker isn't quite working. As you can see here, this is a metric of how fears of climate change have grown in the past year. And with GOP under 40, that's 58% more concerned than they were last year about climate. So again, this base is really only growing. If it was 75% in 2019, what's it going to be in 2020? So there's so much potential here that literally is being untouched by all of these, by all the mainstream climate change groups and environmentalists. But right now, the fact that young Republicans support carbon fee and dividend and that they're scared of the climate threat really means practically nothing. As long as we don't engage them, their beliefs fall right under the radar. We need to actually reach out to them and engage them, or else nothing happens if they just believe in it. They have to actually be advocating for it. So that's the reason why it's vital to empower eco-friendly Republicans under 40, because they are the key to communicate to members of Congress that climate policy, especially carbon fee and dividend, can be and is bipartisan. And all of us at CCL know exactly why it's important to have bipartisan climate policy. First and foremost, in the short term, we have to get a bill passed by a divided Congress and a Republican president. But more importantly, in the long term, policies that are bipartisan are inherently much more resistant to repeal because, well, they're bipartisan. But we all know that. That's just review. The main point is that we need Republican support. So Luntz found something else really interesting. He found that, let me go to the next slide, 69% of Republicans of all ages are concerned that their stance on climate is hurting their outreach to younger voters. So even though these older voters aren't really Prius-driving vegan climate heroes, they can see that young people are, or at least want to be. Right? They can recognize that we need to change something. And what's encouraging is that Republicans are already beginning to feel the heat, no pun intended. And we're actually seeing these concerns materializing in DC. House Republicans have started taking action in 2020, albeit slim action, with a series of new climate change bills rolled out by Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. The bills include provisions like growing more trees and granting tax credits to companies who develop carbon capture technology. Kevin didn't give us any emissions targets though, and one notable thing is that the plans only focus on sucking carbon out of the air and not actually preventing it from getting there in the first place. And fossil fuels are virtually untouched in these plans, but let's look at the glass half full here. Conservatives in DC are starting to wrap their heads around the climate. This is the beginning of incremental growth, and it's all due to the youth. Here's an excerpt from the Washington Examiner, who interviewed Kevin McCarthy. It said that McCarthy issued one stark warning for his party. He said younger voters are worried about climate change and cautioned that Republicans were risking their viability in elections over the long term by ignoring this critical issue. McCarthy said, "We need to have an open discussion about what the party looks like in 20 years, and we should be a little nervous. We have to do something different than what we've done." To that end, McCarthy said House Republicans are planning to introduce a series of bills addressing climate change. He said the bills would seek to use conservative, free market principles to protect the environment, rejecting democratic plans such as Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal. Let's have that debate instead of everybody saying we're just deniers, McCarthy said. So the debate has opened. It's up for grabs right now. We need to get in there and peacefully throw some elbows. Because while the Republican plans really only scratch the surface, at least we're at the surface. We even saw that President Trump signed onto the pledge to plant 1 trillion trees by 2050 at the Davos conference. And this is President Trump. This is the first major environmental policy to penetrate through his climate denial. That's pretty big. So we're scratching the surface, yes, but before we were in the deep ravines of climate change being a Chinese hoax. You know, young Republicans and youth speaking up made Republicans realize in DC that they should check themselves and start being proactive on climate and not just be deniers. So imagine what we could do if we can actually communicate to them that Republicans want to see a federal carbon fee and dividend. And we wouldn't even be lying or even exaggerating. 75% of them do. Let's tell them that those people are out there. So that's been my job for the year. Working to bring out the voices of those 75% of Republicans under 40 who support a carbon fee and dividend. And they're out there, I promise. And yet before I found CCL, my own climate voice had to be brought out of me as well. Because for a while it was quite muted. And as a sort of case study, I thought I would share my story of climate reckoning, showcasing the motives and backstory behind many of my age and political orientation. So, as you might be able to tell from my slightly threatening last name, my parents immigrated from Iran to the US in the early 80s. And at that point, because of the 1979 revolution, Iranian Americans made up the largest subset of foreign students in the US. And the reason was that Iran had become completely just destitute of any opportunity, and it was governed by this absolutist theocratic chokehold. My dad had tried to attend college multiple times in Iran, and he had the grades to get in too. But every single time he got rejected because he didn't fit their religious and political vetting. And at that point, he knew he had to leave. He had to come to America to get an education and leave Iran. And like every good immigrant story, a turning point occurred in the dark back alley. US dollars had recently been banned in Iran, but my dad and grandfather were able to obtain 3 $20 bills in a dark Tehran back alley from a shady-looking guy. So with just 60 bucks and a plane ticket, my dad arrived in the States. But actually it ended up being 40 because one of the 20s was found to be fake. Pretty sad. So with that foundation, he worked to pass his community college classes, sleeping on whatever couch I could find, before transferring to UC San Diego and finally landing his first job as an engineer. But even in his first week working, he didn't have enough money to cover his food until he got his paycheck, so he had to borrow money from his coworkers. My mom's story followed a similar trajectory. She arrived to a wholly foreign country at only 16 and worked her way into a successful career in Silicon Valley, graduating college 2 years early. People in CCL often ask me how I developed my political views, and what I describe is exactly how. My parents showed me that America's freedom of markets, speech, and religion can empower anyone of any walk of life to work hard, succeed, and make a life for themselves. My parents are the American dream, and keeping that dream alive is what drives my worldview. And this is far from the correct convention for me to give a stump speech in favor of the GOP. But the point is that the values that I inherited from my parents of personal responsibility and empowering the individual corresponded mostly with the Republican Party. And that's how I entered politics as a high school freshman, with that in mind. So naturally, I thought climate change was a liberal hoax. I mean, who can blame me, right? Right? That's what everyone was saying. You know, the Fox News, Donald Trump, conservative Twitter, Republican congressmen, they were all saying climate change is a liberal hoax. So, like any good, faithful Republican, I said, well, it's a liberal hoax. And, you know, they kept saying that climate change was this globalist scheme meant to bring socialism to the US and desecrate the Constitution. It's pretty scary stuff, so naturally I was scared. I was that guy that always interjected pseudoscience into all conversations with other students. I was proud of it too. You know, there'd be kids talking and I'd walk in and say, well, actually, the alarmists were sounding about global cooling in the 70s, and then I'd drop the mic and smugly walk away. So as high school went on, my environmental beliefs began to evolve, thankfully. I took AP and honor science courses and learned about anthropogenic climate change. And at that point, the fact right in front of me, I think they're cutting me off for saying climate denials and stuff, I'm sorry. It gets better, don't worry, it gets better, okay. So at that point, I was taking these science courses and the facts were right there, right in front of me. And there was really no use vehemently disputing them anymore. And I joined the debate team also, and I found really quickly, and I mean extremely quickly, how indefensible climate denial was. Those were some short debates. So at that point, I knew the climate was changing, but I just kind of pushed it into the back of my mind because it wasn't my issue to think about. This wasn't my thing. Climate change policy was bread and butter progressive doctrine. That wasn't my job to worry about it as a conservative. I didn't want to ban cows or airplanes. I didn't want to support a hostile government takeover of the economy. So I kind of just allowed cognitive dissonance to take control. It's not my problem. I thought, this is not what I should worry about. So in my junior year, House Democrats, in their infinite wisdom, rolled out the Green New Deal. And boy, did the conservative community have a field day with that. I think it can be argued that the Green New Deal actually set back the environmental movement. Because there was this renewed fervor of climate denial from the right, with Fox News and conservative echo chambers reiterating that climate change is equal to socialism. And honestly, the Green New Deal kind of proved that to them right there. So at that point, it kind of set me back and renewed, yeah, this stuff is BS. This is just socialism that the left is trying to bring to us. It had things like economic assistance to those unwilling to work, banning airplanes in favor of high-speed rail. Do not get California Republicans started on high-speed rail, okay? That's a dead end. So, anyway, in my AP research class, I had an opportunity to write a paper on anything I wanted. So, given the recent media trends, I chose to scathingly bash the Green New Deal. And I was so excited to point out how obsolete the bill would be through both an economic and environmental lens. And proving how it was a poor economic choice was quite easy and quite fun. But I started stumbling when it came to talking about the environment. I could easily bash the jobs and housing guarantee, but I found it difficult to say that we didn't need to reduce emissions quickly and aggressively. Every single piece of academic literature had said a consensus that there was no way around ending our use of fossil fuels. I couldn't find what I wanted to hear. And at that point, I began to contextualize really how many lies were disseminated by the conservative media, the Hartland Institute, the oil lobby, and how easy it was to fall for their misinformation. And I struggled with it for a while, thinking how can I reconcile being a fiscal conservative with believing in the real existential crisis of climate change. This consistently nagged at me, even while I wasn't even working on the assignment. And as I continued to look into it, I found some interesting free market environmental plans, like innovation lotteries, technology subsidies, and wait for it, carbon fee and dividend. The policy just kind of made sense to me. It used capitalism and innovation to transition the market gradually away from fossil fuels. I didn't quite connect it back to my personal beliefs, but it sufficed for me to write about it in my paper. I didn't become a champion climate advocate, but I found solace in being able to point to a solution. Many conservatives, or at least the ones that we want to be interacting with, actually do get to this point. It wasn't until about a month later, when I went from believing in a solution to advocating for it. I went to the monthly Liberty Forum meeting, which is a gathering of a lot, like hundreds of conservatives in my area. And by conservative, I really mean like conservative. This was the kind of place where Trump bumper stickers outnumbered people. It was just a lot of conservatives very passionate about their president. So as you can imagine, I was really surprised to see the Citizens Climate Lobby's Conservative Caucus having a booth there. And they were taking a huge beating from the other attendees. They were braving it out. So I thought it was interesting how they were here talking to conservatives, and I got to go talk to them. And I got to meet fellow conservatives who were passionate about carbon pricing, and that's when it all clicked. Because I knew that climate change could be solved by using the free market, but I didn't know how I could help or what I could do. And then there it was, right there in front of me, on a silver platter, how I could help. How I could promote a free market capitalistic solution that adhered to my values while still tackling climate change. I was so excited that I signed up on both clipboards twice for no reason. I don't know if I got emails, but I was so excited I signed up 2 times. And this is my point here, that many young conservatives have lived my exact same story, but fell short at the clipboard. Because they got there, they got to realizing all the lies and that climate change is real and that there are solutions. But there was never the clipboard there. And the idea is that no one ever reached out and extended a hand and said, here's what you can do. So remember that 75% of Republicans under 40 support a carbon fee and dividend. You probably can say that by memory now. But, you know, the issue is that of that 75%, not enough are actually engaged. A study from George Mason University showed how many Americans by party are engaged in environmental activism, or at least identify as climate advocates. So we can go to my next slide here. So as you can see here, with Republicans, only 13% identify with climate activists. That doesn't even mean they're actually doing anything, but they at least identify with it. 13%. Now compare that to the 75% under 40 who support carbon fee and dividend. There's a huge discrepancy there. And that's where the potential is. And the reason why that exists, again, is because we don't have enough booths, enough outstretched hands, or enough engagement with young Republicans. We don't have enough clipboards. That's the idea, to mold that discrepancy into zero, is to reach out and engage more. So along that, I wanted to share a few videos from New Climate Voices. And they're a group compiling stories just like mine, of conservatives who flipped the switch on climate. And they're stories from prominent scholars and politicians, and they paint an optimistic story. And what they show is that it's possible for conservatives to come around on climate, and it shows that we should be engaging with these people because they're starting to realize what's going on, but we're not there helping them do something about it. So let's go ahead and cue the videos now.
Do you have your own video out here?
We're working. I was a congressman for one of the most conservative districts in South Carolina.
We have audio with
the reddest states in the nation. The National Rifle Association gave me an A, and so did the American.
Sorry.
We'll work it out. There we go.
Oh, wow.
Conservative Union. For my first 6 years in Congress, I believed that climate change was a bunch of hooey. When I ran again in 2004, my son had just turned 18 and was voting for the first time. He said to me, "Dad, I'll vote for you, but you're going to clean up your act on the environment." So I listened to my family, got on the House Science Committee, got the opportunity to go to Antarctica, and saw the evidence in the ice core drillings. They show that the Earth's atmosphere has changed, and it's the burning of fossil fuels that's changed it, creating stronger storms and the risk of flooding from higher sea levels. A lot of us conservatives would like to avoid the issue because we assume it means drastic changes and a bigger government. But it doesn't have to be that way. The conservative thing to do is to protect our families and nation against this threat. We can create a new energy future that has lots of jobs and lots of wealth creation and that lights up the world with more energy, more mobility, more freedoms. It's exciting to see more and more conservatives coming around on climate change. If you share our faith in free people and free enterprise, stand with us. Learn more about climate change and what you can do to help. Go to newclimatevoices.org.
All right, so that was from Congressman Bob Inglis, and there are two more that I have to share which are just as impactful.
I'm Jerry Taylor, and I'm a Republican. I believe in the importance of property rights, individual liberty, and individual responsibility. But I've changed my mind about climate change. I completely understand why conservatives are skeptical about climate change as a significant problem, because so was I. I used to do whatever I could to convince people that climate change wasn't a threat. It was my job at a libertarian think tank, and I was good at it. Then one day, a climate expert challenged me and told me to read the actual science for myself, so I did. And what I found was that all the science confirmed that our planet was warming dangerously fast, and carbon emissions from oil, coal, and gas were the cause. So I went to see my colleague, and he admitted to me that our information was skewed to make our point seem stronger. In other words, it was a lie. The facts just don't support denying climate change. When you think about it, it's not conservative to hold on to old technologies that are causing pollution, more violent weather. It is conservative to understand the risks involved in climate change and to do what we can to protect ourselves and our families against that. Climate change is taking our property. It's threatening our freedom, our health, and our national security. And there are very effective free market solutions. Learn more about climate change and
And the last one's from Catherine
Hi,
Hayhoe,
my
who
name
you
is
guys probably
Catherine
know.
Hayhoe, and I'm a climate scientist at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas. A lot of people here where I live don't accept that humans are changing the climate. My husband and I are both evangelical Christians, and when we were first married, he couldn't understand why I'd support a myth made up by liberal tree huggers. By listening to him, I learned a lot about why people are hesitant to accept the science. And my husband learned how the data tells us that yes, humans are changing the climate. Now he's a pastor and he's often asked, how could humans affect something as big as this entire planet? Isn't God in control? Of course I believe God is in control, but I also believe there are consequences to our choices. And clinging to old dirty energy is no longer a good choice. Scientists measure how carbon dioxide is increasing in the atmosphere as we burn fossil fuels. Carbon dioxide traps heat, keeping it from going back out to space, instead warming the Earth. And climate change matters because it affects people. It's increasing heavy rainfall, heat waves, and the severity of hurricanes. Moving to clean energy to protect our climate is completely consistent with our values as Christians. Plus, investing in clean energy will give us cleaner air, conserve our water, and create jobs. Here in Texas, we already have over 30,000 jobs in wind and solar energy. And these new energy sources have revitalized the economies of many of our small towns. This is about protecting our way of life and not letting politics get in the way. Learn more about climate change and what
So, yeah. So these videos point to the rationale that a lot of conservatives are starting to realize the facts, and again, how important it is to keep engaging with them, to activate them, to become like Bob Inglis, like Jerry Taylor, like Catherine Hayhoe, all these people who have begun to reconcile their conservative values with climate action, and that demographic is really ours for the taking. So after I found CCL at my local conservative gathering, I was mentored by Tim Deck, who many of you know as the Idaho State Coordinator. So he was able to work with me closely in beginning my conservative outreach, and even getting me to the national conference as my first real activity at CCL. And that kind of outreach and one-on-one connection empowered me to keep going, and to do all that I could to reach a climate solution. It made me feel wanted at CCL. And this is why the Conservative Fellow Program was created, to activate conservatives, especially young ones, who want to see free market solutions. So in turn, I've been able to give talks to college conservative clubs like Young Americans for Liberty, as well as my local Young Republican groups. And with all the talks that I've given, not a single person has challenged the science. Very few even challenge the economics of carbon dividend. What I see every time is young conservatives who have been overlooked by the climate movement, who have been told that climate activism isn't for them, and they're now excited to have a solution to get behind. So the question is now, how do we build more bridges with young people and with conservatives? They say that 80% of success is just showing up, and I think that that's absolutely true. If those brave CCL volunteers didn't show up at the Liberty Forum in March 2019, I wouldn't be standing up here. We have to show up and talk to conservatives and meet them where they are at. You know, go to that county Republican Party meeting, go to that college Republican club meeting, go seek out the young Republican group in your area, and engage conservatives on climate. So if 80% of it is showing up, that leaves 20% more to play with, which would involve strategizing your outreach and messaging. Now that you have this young conservative talking, how do you get them involved? How do we recruit new climate advocates who are right of center? And the name of the game is making them feel comfortable in CCL. Remember that while most young conservatives believe in the science, they aren't advocating for solutions because environmentalism isn't perceived as a welcome space to Republicans. That's what we, as the climate advocates, can control. We control who feels comfortable in what the atmosphere is in environmentalism. I felt at ease embarking into this new atmosphere because I met fellow conservatives in the Conservative Caucus, and that was my first exposure to CCL. And this might not always be possible, of course, so something that I recommend doing is connecting new conservatives you meet with someone locally in your Conservative Caucus. You can contact Jim Tolbert, who is the National Director of Conservative Outreach, or post in the Conservative Caucus section on CCL Community. Giving new conservatives that personal touch of someone who can relate to them is key to keeping them involved and engaged. For example, I met a conservative high schooler who wanted to join CCL, but she lived a few hours away from me. So I got in touch with my state conservative coordinator and worked out a way to welcome her into CCL that was smooth and respected her political ideology. Because again, remember that conservatives are making a big leap trying this out. This isn't for them. So we need to do everything we can to make it so they feel comfortable. Connect them with fellow like-minded climate change advocates and make them feel like they should be here and that they're not taking this huge risk by doing this. So whenever real-life conservatives are unavailable, trusted messengers, especially prominent conservative authorities, also help to put conservatives at ease. I have a few examples here to show you. So for example, we have Lindsey Graham here. And he says, I'm a Republican. I believe that the greenhouse effect is real, and that CO2 emissions generated by man is creating our greenhouse effect that traps heat and the planet is warming. The price on carbon, that's the way to go. So you can see Lindsey Graham, this conservative, Trump-backing Republican from South Carolina, is here telling people that he believes in climate change and that a carbon tax is the way to do it. You know, that's pretty huge, showing them that even Lindsey Graham is someone who's on board with this. Another example is Milton Friedman. He's the hero of any fiscal conservative. He said that the best way to do it is not to have bureaucrats in Washington write rules and regulations. The best way to do it is to impose a tax on the amount of pollutants emitted. So again, it's showing that all of these free market heroes are advocating for the same thing that we are. And you can show that again to put conservatives at ease and say, hey, you're not alone in this. There are others like you who are engaging in the same activity. So if you head to the Conservative Caucus page on the CCL community, there is a whole database of quotes like these. And it's all about proving that there is no contradiction between being conservative and being a climate advocate. Another often overlooked thing is to keep in mind that chapter meetings should be as devoid of partisan politics as possible. You know, again, conservatives are already stepping out of their comfort zone to attend. And even jokes or little remarks about Trump or Mitch McConnell can reinforce the idea that conservatives are an unwanted presence in the climate movement. So whenever you can, make sure that you're being constructive and optimistic and proactive about the CCL way is. You know, you should never be bashing any political party at your meetings because again, that makes conservatives feel like they're not wanted and that their presence is unwelcome. We don't want that. So again, to show that conservatives are welcome and wanted, there are even some great programs that CCL funds to help conservatives. You can point especially motivated newbies like I was to the Conservative Travel Scholarship, which pays a $500 stipend for Right of Center volunteers to travel to the June Lobby Day. And this is a great way to take advantage of potential and showcase the amazing, empowering opportunities that CCL offers. Because remember, one of my first exposures to CCL was going to the June Lobby Day with that scholarship. And again, if you find people who are motivated, you can show them that, hey, we really want you here, and we want you to be involved, and these are the ways that we can tangibly help you achieve your goals as a potential climate advocate. So really pointing them to these resources can help them. So to conclude, there's never been a more important time to capture the attention of young conservatives who want to have a livable world for their future. And I hope I was able to give some insight into how young conservatives think and how we can best maximize their potential. With that, I want to leave the last 10 minutes or so to answer questions from the audience. So, thank you.
Is it it's not plugged in.
I mean, details. If I talk really loud, it works really well. So I think the best way to do questions is for you to ask it, and I will repeat it. Or you can.
I can repeat it.
Oh, friend, I guess. Okay.
Adrian, it seems like with some of the people you had on the video and yourself too, there's when you kind of actually look at the science and realize that maybe there were some lies. There seems like you have to kind of admit that maybe you were wrong, or and there's some overcoming of the ego that has to happen. How would you, what are your thoughts on how to make that easier for people?
I think one of the reasons why young conservatives are more into climate than older ones is because a lot of us are still kind of molding our political views. And when we see lies, we're more able to contextualize it and kind of rethink our values. You know, a lot of the older conservatives, they're completely set in what they believe, and they're probably going to change their mind. But a lot of the younger ones resort to the promised lies, and that's why I think we should devote resources in engaging with them more so than older ones. But I listened to someone on our national call a few months ago, I don't remember who he was, but he mentioned that when dealing with older conservatives, it's best to engage with ones that already believe in the science and disregard the ones that don't, because they're not going to change their minds at that age. What's important is engaging the ones that already kind of might be able to get involved and then make sure that they're activated as much as possible. But with the young ones, I think the opportunities are endless, because I think we're more able to change our views and realize that the older ones are lying to us. So that's how I would approach that, is be more proactive with youth on like science issues, but with older ones, stay more within those who already believe in it.
If you were on that side of the room and you have a question, you can form a line over there behind John. John, will you stand up real quick? Yeah, just real quick. So form a line over there somewhere, and I'll walk this mic, but it only goes this far. So if you're on this side, you can come over here.
Thank you, Tamara. Adrian, incredible speech, thank you very much. You said that carbon fee and dividend, despite being free market and so on, is a big leap for conservatives. And I had that same experience. I talked with a very liberal friend of mine she's really concerned about the regulatory pause. We saw from Danny Richter yesterday how mild the regulatory pause really is. But having that coffee made me really think about it from a conservative perspective. And the REMA report shows that after 20 years, the fee is 25% of federal revenues. And so we're asking our conservative friends to trust the government to collect so much money and return it to people. So I want to see how you talk to conservatives about that and how you can try to bridge that big leap.
I usually preface it saying that I don't trust the government either. And that's my genuine actual belief, I don't. But the great thing about our bill is that it actually has a cap put into it. I think it's a certain percentage that you can't exceed for administrative costs. So there's actually something in the bill that stipulates exactly where it goes. I don't think I would actually support a carbon tax that went to the general fund, because I don't trust the government would do what they're supposed to with that. But our bill says exactly where it's going to go, and it's stipulated in the actual bill. So I think that's one way to go for it. And whenever they're concerned about big government, when you're talking about carbon fee and dividend, just always point to the bad guy as the Green New Deal. I love doing that. Because you say, okay, we can either have a revenue neutral tax that decreases the size of government, or you can have what they're saying and nationalize the entire thing, increase our government by like 500%. You can do that, or you can do this good revenue neutral carbon fee, which puts a cap on the amount of costs that are put to the administration. So that's what I would say.
Hi, I'm Carla from Corvallis, Oregon. Thank you, that was wonderful. So many of us are in chapters that are full of a lot of liberals. And we don't necessarily have anyone like Tim Deck to go and table. We have a wonderful kind of middle of the road person who took on the conservative caucus liaison position and tried to approach our Republican college group. And because he wasn't one of them, he had a lot of trouble doing what you're suggesting we do. And I'm wondering if you, well, I guess this is a general question for the Conservative Fellows and the Conservative Caucus of CCL. Will you come to our chapter? And we don't have credibility as liberals to do what you're suggesting, and so I'm sort of asking, what do we do then?
Yeah, I think you're right, you have a point there. And the first thing is that Tim actually isn't in my chapter. We have Silicon Valley South and Silicon Valley North, so he's actually in the other chapter in Silicon Valley, which is like 45 minutes away from me. But the idea is that we're still in the same local area, and any conservative that is in your 1 hour radius is someone who can still connect with the person in your chapter. But aside from that, I think using the Conservative Caucus as a good resource is great, because you can contact Jim Tolbert or Go in Community, and you can see if you can find someone in your area. And if not, I've actually in the past been the person to make first contact with people that are not even near me. So someone from Chico, California will say to me, hey, can you email this club and say, I'm a Republican, I want to talk to you about climate change. But then we can send someone else to go do it. Or also things like Zoom have worked in the past, where you can have a fellow or a conservative talk through Zoom for a portion of the presentation. So there are ways to get around it. As long as you have some kind of contact with a conservative, with wherever they are, we can make it work. So that's what I would say.
And this is a perfect time for me to say that we would love to have a conservative fellow in our region. Pause. So go find us one. Go make a conservative friend, and then we can have our own Adrian, and he or she will not be as good or as handsome, but they'll be closer. Okay? And in Portland we happen to have a couple of conservative members who may be willing to make some time. I'm not going to name any names because that'd be mean, but they may have some time, and they might be able to help too. So I think we have time for a couple more questions.
Excellent presentation here this morning.
Thank you.
And I was just wondering, how do you reach out to folks in your own, of those conversations you have with folks in your own generation who actually do like the Green New Deal, very concerned about climate change, but are looking at left of center approaches here? I'm just curious how you interact with those folks.
Yeah, I think it's all about messaging and highlighting certain aspects to different people. We have presentations in our CCL slide deck for left of center and for right of center audiences, and just highlighting different things. Highlighting the idea that the dividend is progressive, highlighting the idea that the regulatory pause is really barely anything. And making it a selling point that this is really our only hope because it's bipartisan. Saying that we can't force just a one-party bill through a chokehold of partisanship. We need to be able to have it be able to resist repeal in the future. So I think building on bipartisanship, if they're worried about conservatives being on board with it, and also just certain aspects of the bill can correspond to more liberal audiences and students. So I haven't had any trouble with getting liberals of my age on board with the bill, which is not as impressive.
Last question.
Last question.
Hi, so in order to have this bill become bipartisan, you have to give the power to the people, and you have to allow for the free market to determine to some extent how much carbon emissions are created. With climate change being such an urgent issue, do you think that laws like this are urgent enough, and do you think that they do enough?
What I think is that using the market is really our only hope. My stance is that capitalism got us into this mess, and it can take it out of it. It can take us out of it also, because I think that the power of markets and innovation create this new sort of incentive to create green tech that things like subsidies and research can't. The idea that you can use this market to create profit and gains, I think, is the only way to really spur the amount of speed we need to address the issue. And we've seen projections, of course, of how much reductions we're going to see by 2030, by 2050, so I have absolute faith in this policy. And I think we all know it's not a silver bullet. We need things like carbon capture, we need things like stuff for ag and all that stuff, but I think that this is the biggest step we can take, and I think it's the best overarching solution that we have right now.
Thank you, Adrian. So, it may be tempting to go take a really long break right now. Maybe not, actually. You look all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. So what we get to do now is we're going to spend time with our colleagues from our states. And we have a couple of schedule changes. Thank you, John. If you are an Oregonian or identify as an Oregonian, then you don't have to go anywhere. You can stay here, okay? Idaho is now in Chief Concomly, which is right across the hall, the smaller room, okay? Are you still meeting, Idaho?
Yes.
Okay, great. In Chief Concomly. Washington, end of the hall. I've heard it said Sacagawea, but I don't know if that's true, so Sacagawea, however you want to say it. And Alaska, I would say, where's Barb? Where are you, Barb? Barb, okay. So Barb, I would suggest that you guys, Alaskans, go into the lobby and those nice comfortable couches. It says boardroom, but you won't be comfortable in boardroom the way it is right now. Okay? And then I might, you guys will decide if you're gonna go join Washington. And one last plug for Future Feels, which is out there. I'm gonna share something. I got one of my actions. Oh, where's it? Anyway, I was just reaching in my pocket and I pulled this the other day at Climate Camp and I'm eager to share it with you. So you won't really know what I'm talking about if you don't go do some Future Feels at some point this morning. Grace is gonna take that down later and I told her to keep it up so she's coming back extra so we can get some extra cool data so that we can add it to the data world. So thank you guys, have a great time with State Strategies. After State Strategies, you have a networking break of a half an hour. And then 11, check your schedule. There are 3 different breakouts. After your breakout, come right back here. We're going to hear from Mark. And then we'll send you on your merry way for the rest of the day. Thanks.